Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March edition of the Southeast Climate Monthly webinar, where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. I'm Sandra Rain, the regional climatologist from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I will be giving a climate overview. Our speakers today are Jeff Dober from the Southeast River Forecast Center, and he will provide a water resources overview and a spring flood outlook. And Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will provide an agricultural impact update. We thank them always for joining us. Just a reminder to type your questions and comments in the question box at any time, and they will be answered at the end. Also, a recap email of this webinar will be sent out with a YouTube link of this recording. So look for that in your inbox. All right, let's talk about the climate. We'll begin with what happened this winter. So as we all know, we had a La Niña winter, and the typical impacts and patterns are warmer and drier for the Southeast region. But what did we see this winter? We actually had above average precipitation for the eastern part of the region. Raleigh, North Carolina had its second wettest winter. It was over 7 inches above normal for precipitation, and Richmond, Virginia had its third wettest winter on record with over 6 inches above normal. Also, typically with the La Niña pattern, we see above average temperatures for the winter, but this year temperatures stayed roughly around average. So why was this La Niña different? Well, one of the reasons is due to the Arctic oscillation. It was in the negative phase for much of the winter, allowing periods of cooler air to surge southward from the north into the Southeast region. As a matter of fact, in December, Florida observed its first below average monthly mean temperature since March of 2018. Another reason we did not see the typical La Niña pattern was due to the polar vortex. Sudden stratospheric warming disrupts the polar vortex, weakening the winds around the jet stream, also allowing colder air to move southward. This creates like a wave-like pattern with cold air moving southward, but also warmer air moving northward as well. Now, where this pattern sets up can change. So like we saw in February, the cold air came all the way down into Texas, and Texas had, that really cold air outbreak. But this could also shift eastward into our region or shift westward into the Southwest region as well. But all of these reasons combined is why we didn't see the typical La Niña pattern this winter. For the past 30 days, however, temperatures were still near average, except in Florida, where we saw, about 6 to 8 degrees above average temperatures. The Caribbean was also near average as well. Precipitation for the last 30 days has been variable. We saw some above average precipitation in the eastern part of the region, with slightly below average precipitation in northern Georgia and central Alabama. We have seen a little bit of snow this year. However, for Virginia and North Carolina, it was a little bit below average, but quite a bit above average in parts of Alabama. On February 15th, unfortunately, there was an EF3 tornado with winds of 160 miles per hour, and that occurred in Brunswick County, North Carolina. There were 3 fatalities with this tornado, and this was the strongest tornado to occur in Brunswick County since records began in 1950. It was also the only tornado to cause fatalities in Brunswick County, North Carolina. Now, we are still under a La Niña advisory. This will be updated actually Thursday, March 11th. But we should see, currently they're predicting a 60% chance of going into neutral conditions for the spring, April through June. But I do want to point out towards the end, of next autumn there, models are suggesting another potential La Nina winter. Now, although this could change, it is something to keep an eye on. The current drought monitor shows exceptional drought in the western half of the nation. And closer to home, we see that at the beginning of February, we had some areas of abnormally dry conditions and a small area of moderate drought in central Alabama and northern Puerto Rico. Towards the end of February, it's changed very little. The abnormally dry conditions have decreased in coverage a little bit, but the moderate drought has stayed relatively the same. For the spring outlook, February through May, we should see drought development likely in southern Florida. However, everywhere else hopefully should remain drought-free. Temperatures this spring, there's a higher probability of warmer than normal temperatures for the southeast region. However, as far as precipitation is concerned, equal chances for either above average or below average precipitation in the northern part of the region, but a probability of below average precipitation in the southern part of the region. With the spring season upon us, we can look forward to pollen. The spring leaf index anomaly suggests later blooms in the blue shaded areas and earlier blooms in the red shaded areas, which would also suggest a later time for pollen to develop and an earlier time for pollen to develop depending on the red or the blue areas. If we see the Raleigh pollen count to the graph on your right, the earliest that we've had a maximum amount of pollen was on March 28th in 2007, and the latest we've seen a maximum amount of pollen in the air was on April 20th in 2004. The highest amount occurred on April 7th in 2010. What that means for this year, I'm not entirely sure. I hope Pam has a little bit more insight on that. A study in 2015 actually suggests that the influence of ENSO on the springtime hail and tornado activity. It suggests that there's a higher storm frequency in Virginia and North Carolina and northern Alabama during La Nina winters, but a lower storm frequency in Georgia and Florida. If you notice that there's like a bullseye of purple in eastern Oklahoma and eastern Texas. Now, if this shifts even further eastward, we could see a higher storm frequency in our region. This is again due to the La Nina pattern that typically sets up, where we have colder air surging from the north, but warmer air coming up from the Gulf of Mexico that can cause these storms to occur. So for the next few days, it should be warmer and drier, but then after that, 6 to 10 days out, we see the patterns going to become more active again, with the probability of above average precipitation and a probability of warmer than average temperatures in Florida, but possibly cooler than average temperatures as we go westward into the region. But this suggests that a more active pattern will be setting up in about 6 to 10 days out. So here's the summary of things. I would like to note that the Southeast Regional Climate Center website is still under construction, but you should be able to use it. If you do have any problems with it, please reach out via social media or email William there. His email is at the bottom, and we will be more than happy to help you with anything you need. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff for the water resources overview.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. So we can go to the next slide there. So we'll be talking about the spring flood outlook today, and we start with looking at the current 28-day average stream flow levels across the southeast. That's the map there to the left, and see they're mostly showing well above normal stream flow across a good portion of the Carolinas and even down through South Georgia and North Florida. But elsewhere, across the southeast, we see the green dots there, and that's indicating the near normal stream flow across there, like Alabama and Georgia. To the right, we see the 28-day duration hydrograph, the runoff duration hydrograph for basically the southeast region. And after a really wet February, we see the black line there, that's which is the observed runoff from stream flow. It's jumped into the above normal range, which is fairly significant considering this is the time of year that stream flows are at their highest normally. We can go to the next slide. And looking at the state by state, we see the runoff hydrographs, which are derived from, again, the stream flow, are showing near normal across Alabama, Florida, with Georgia just slightly above normal recently. But for the most part, in the winter stream flow, it's been in the typical range there for these three states. Next slide. So for the Carolinas and Virginia, a little bit of a different story, as we see for most of the winter stream flow has been running in the above normal range. In fact, you see in the graphics there, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, they've really been running mostly in the above normal range all the way back. You got to go all the way back to last spring. So it's, as Sandra pointed out, it's a very wet year in 2020 for this part of the region, and it shows in the stream flows. We can go to the next slide. And so, not surprising, with the recent rain events and stream flow already running high, we're having some flooding ongoing on many of our rivers, especially the coastal plain rivers currently. And this is as of yesterday. We see mainly minor flood impacts, with many of these rivers recessing from the big rain events about a week or so ago. But we do have one red dot there, meaning moderate flood impacts ongoing there, and that's on the Waccamaw River near Conway, South Carolina. But yes, overall, high water and flooding from the Gulf Coast up through the Carolina coastal plain ongoing right now. Go to the next slide. But this is really not unusual for this time of year. We're in week 10 of the year, and we see that this is typically the peak week for flooding as far as the number of river flood events for the southeast region. And as you can see by the graph, the river flood season for the southeast as a whole usually runs from December through almost mid-April. So by spring, for the southeast rivers, flooding is typically, we're in mid-season right now to almost late season. The spring season is sort of almost late season, as you know, especially as you get into mid to late March and early April. But then we see the secondary season there in late summer and fall. And I thought it was also interesting, Sandra was showing the dates of the pollen peak. And I thought it was interesting how that sort of coincides with the end of the river flood season for the southeast. And this has this tie into the vegetation coming out, and we see the forest canopy spread and runoff decreasing. But a lot of those pollen peak dates that she was showing, they sort of fall in that in those latter weeks. A lot of them fell in the end of March to through the second week, it seemed like, in April. So I thought that was interesting that those two sort of coincided. We can go to the next slide. And like I said, this January through April high flow season, flood season, is typical for most of the Ohio Valley and Gulf Coast. But for the Florida Peninsula, the rivers, as part of the southeast region, the river flood season is a bit different, and it coincides with the convective wet season and tropical season down there. So more like August through October, as the wet season builds into the tropical season. And as far as what that looks like, we can go to the next slide. For South and Central Florida, this is really what the river flood season looks like down there. Quite quite a bit different than the interior Southeast. And really, the Southeast region is sort of different than most of the country as a whole. As we were talking about, and as you saw on the previous slide, a lot of flooding. The flood season is more in that springtime period, March, and really into May, and in the Rockies, it goes all the way into early summer. But as far as the remainder of the flood season, we go to the next slide here. So far as the remainder of the river flood season or the spring river flood season for the Southeast, we're going to continue to see more of the same, given the current stream flows and inherent conditions. Overall, the most vulnerable areas for flooding for the rest of the spring are those areas currently in flood now, mainly the coastal Carolinas in particular. And so we highlight that area to potentially have potential for more river flooding, both in magnitude and coverage than typical for this time of year. So for places like Alabama and Georgia, keep in mind, as I said, some river flooding is typical. So we'll have chances at more flooding, river flooding in these areas, but nothing more than typical. For the Carolinas, we're probably, because of those inherent conditions, we could have more than typical as far as coverage and magnitude in that red highlighted area for the Southeast. And all this information, the information that Sandra talked about as well, the climate information and the forecasts as far as La Niña and CPC forecasts, those are all taken into account here as well. And that's sort of the spring flood outlook. So in summary, right now, stream flows remain above normal across the Carolinas, coastal Georgia, and parts of North Florida from the recent rainfall events from a couple of weeks ago, and near normal across North Georgia and Alabama, as well as Central and South Florida. And as far as the spring flood outlook, we're calling for typical springtime river flooding, except for the coastal Carolina region and Southern Virginia, where flooding may be more than typical because of their current inherent conditions. And that's all I had. Thank you, Sandra, and now I'll pass it on to Pam.
Pam, you're unmuted now.
Okay, now can you hear me? I had this great introduction and you didn't get to hear any of it.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
It's a beautiful day in Athens today. It's 70. It's going to be up to 72, and the green wave has hit us. The bushes are starting to put out leaves now, and so I'll talk a little bit more about phenology in just a minute. But hopefully, wherever you are, and I know we have people tuning in from a pretty wide area. If you aren't seeing spring already, you will see it soon. Of course, this is actually spring for climatologists. We start on March 1st. So you can go ahead to the next slide. And you've seen some of these before, but they're worth talking about again. The overall conditions for agriculture, you can see the last 30 days we've been quite warm, especially down in Florida, where they've been way above normal in temperature. In other parts, not as much. You can see sort of a peek at how bad the conditions were to the west of us in the central part of the US. And of course, that was associated with that real cold blast that went through Texas. And we missed it this time. You know, it could be in another year, we might be the ones that are in front of the fire hose of that cold air. And so it just so happened that this year the wave pattern set up so that they got most of it, and we stayed relatively warm by comparison. The parts of the southeast that were the coldest were probably the parts that had the most rain. You can see on the right-hand side there, the map of precipitation departures from the 30-day average. You can see there's really two bands there. One is a streak across southern Georgia, which has brought no end of complaints to my office because it's been very wet, and they keep saying, oh, it's supposed to be La Niña and we're supposed to be dry. And you know, statistics shows that at least probably 9 out of 10 years we would be dry, but this is one of the exceptions. And that's why statistics have to be taken for what they're worth. Then there's a second streak of storm tracks that's really more typical for a La Niña, which goes up through the Ohio River Valley a little bit. And so in between, there's a streak of dry conditions, and that's where drought has formed in southwestern Alabama. And some of the producers there are having problems because the ground is so dry. So we've got this huge dichotomy where there's parts of the southeast that are too wet to get into the fields yet, and there's other parts where it's so dry that things really aren't germinating very well. And so that's caused problems really kind of on both ends. We go to the next picture. This shows a couple of other more drought-related topics or more drought-related indices. On the left is the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index from University of Alabama at Huntsville. And you can see, again, that dichotomy. It's dry in Florida. It's quite wet in South Georgia and Southeast Alabama. And then there's that big streak of fairly dry conditions in northern Georgia. I can see it in my own yard. My vinca is losing all its leaves right now. I'm in one of the dark areas there in northeast Georgia, and stretching down into Alabama and now into the Carolinas, which, considering how much rain they've had over the last 90 days, is quite welcome for all of them. And I think they're very happy to see that sunshine as well. On the right, there's an image that shows the CPC drought tendency forecast. And you can't really see it when I put this map up on the PowerPoint, but if you go to the website, which is listed there, you can see that there's just the barest hint in those areas that I put pink circles on that they think that some flash drought may be starting. You know, it obviously depends a lot on the weather conditions. If we get a wetter week in a couple weeks, that we'll probably nip it in the bud pretty quickly. But right now, things are looking a little bit dry. And so that's been a concern for something we're going to watch very carefully. The drought monitor is supposed to come out on Thursday. It would not surprise me if they add some abnormally dry conditions to some of those regions. Let's go on. So some of the impacts of the recent conditions on agriculture. Areas that are wet, which you saw on the previous couple slides, are way behind on field work to the point where now they're starting to worry about their whole schedule for the season is going to be pushed back, and that could affect things as far as fall. If they get the crops into the ground late, they have to go through their period and they get harvested late, and that means they will have trouble getting things done in the fall, which is an issue when you have to worry about the fall frost. Obviously, it's a long ways from now, and a lot of things can happen, but it's something that farmers need to think about because they plan their year way far ahead of time, and they really need to know how one problem is going to affect things down the road. The wet and the dry areas are both experiencing problems with forage, and they're having to feed hay because of that. Though in the dry areas, the forage just isn't greening up. In the wet areas, it's drowned out, and either way, they're not getting a lot of growth. And so that's a problem for many farmers that are growing livestock. The warm conditions lately have brought out the blueberries. I talked to a blueberry producer earlier this week. He said all the early varieties are wide open blooming, and that's in South Georgia, Southeast Georgia especially, and also in coastal South Carolina. The later varieties are really zooming up, and they will probably all be open by the end of this week, Friday, which is great, but it means that they're a lot more vulnerable to a late frost. So that's something that they're going to be really watching carefully. And producers that produce strawberries, got to keep in mind, this is mostly north of Florida because Florida has a really different cropping pattern. First ripe strawberries they're blooming, they're out. If they had high tunnels to protect them, they're already picking. And so those things are going along pretty well. No, in South Georgia, they're planting corn or they can get into the fields as well, and that's pretty much right on time. Go on. Sandra showed this map earlier. I think this is a resource that you all should know about, the National Phenology Network. Phenology is the study of phenomena, things that change. So it could be the first robin you see in spring. Not so important in the Southeast, but certainly in Michigan where I grew up, that was a big deal. The first green leaf that you see, the first daffodil. There are people that keep track of that, and they keep track of how it changes from one year to the next. And so they can create this map, which is a map of the spring leaf anomaly. The areas that are red means the leaves have come out earlier than usual. The areas that are blue means they're behind the long-term average. And so that's a really interesting way to watch spring. I think spring is probably the most interesting time of the year to watch this, just because everybody's so eager to have spring come on it. But there's also some other things to keep in mind. And the Phenology Network site also has some interesting predictors for things like insect pests, like gypsy moths and the woolly algid, and winter wheat. So you can go there and explore. The website is down on the bottom there. And Sandra or Meredith, can you make sure that that please gets in the summary? Because I think that would be really useful to people. One of the important things to keep in mind with this is that when the green wave hits and the plants come out of dormancy, their needs for water go way up. And so that is something you have to factor into your water balance. When the plants are dormant, they don't need that much water. They still need some. But when they come out of dormancy, man, they need a lot more water. And that really changes the water balance and makes droughts more likely, because now you've got all this extra water use. And so that's something that we're watching closely. And if you're in Virginia, the green wave has not quite hit you yet, but it will get there soon. I just want to make a comment. In my Facebook feed yesterday, I noted in 2012 that today or yesterday, the azaleas were already blooming. Now that was also a La Niña winter. And so that La Niña winter was more typical of what the statistics tell us should happen. And this year, we're probably at least 3 weeks behind that. And so there is still a lot of variability from one year to another, even though you have a La Niña in both cases. We go on. This is a prediction for rainfall for the next 2 weeks. And this is just from the GPS model. You can see a bunch of different models at the tropicaltidbits.com website, which I like to look at. This is the total accumulated rainfall expected through March 23. And you can see the rain band has shifted to the north for the most part. And that's left Florida and a lot of South Alabama and South Georgia fairly dry. I usually expect to see about an inch a week, so we're definitely below that. Especially that north central Florida there, it looks like it could be quite dry. And so that's a region that I expect to maybe see that drought. They've had some abnormally dry conditions there, but I expect to see that expand. For the areas that are under the rain, of course, you got the rain, but you also have the clouds. And that means that solar radiation for the plants is also down. And when you have less sunlight, the plants grow a lot slower. And of course, it keeps temperatures down as well. So that's also an issue. We could see some flash drought in areas that I pointed out before, where we don't have a lot of rain expected. And if you look at the output from this model and some of the other models, we don't really see any big cold outbreaks through late March. That doesn't mean they couldn't happen, but it becomes increasingly less likely as we go through March. We go on to the next slide. This is a repeat from last month where I showed the spring frost dates from agroclimate.org. This week we are in the light green. So if you look at the middle map, light green shows that this week is the average date of last frost for that whole band stretching from central Georgia to the east along the coast of South Carolina and to the west into Alabama. And so we're getting towards that average date. If you're north of that line, you're probably more likely to see another frost yet. And if you're south of that line, you may have seen your last one, but you're probably not completely out of the woods yet. And so this is something that's kind of a useful thing to look at, but it's moving up, so we're getting there. If we go on to the next. Some of the threats that I see for agriculture in the coming weeks, now that we're in warmer weather, means that there's going to be more threats from fungal diseases and insects like spider mites. And so if you have crops that are susceptible to those, you really need to be out in the field scouting for those things and jump right on it if you need to do any treatment. Wet conditions are going to continue to hamper farmers in some areas, depending on the soil. You know, if you have sandy soil, it will dry out much quicker than if you have clay soil. So that's really dependent on your local conditions. The drier conditions are going to help some producers catch up, and hopefully that sunshine as well, as we're under high pressure this whole week. I think the rest of the season, we expect to see more typical La Nina kind of conditions. Now, obviously, it's dying away, so that's going to change over the season, but I think we're going to see more of the active rainfall occur farther to the north. And then this other thing to keep in mind, the worries for potential flash drought development in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. The plants are really sucking up the water now, and the warmer temperatures also increase evaporation, so that's something we'll need to watch carefully. Go on. So just in summary, the wet conditions are still a problem for some producers and field work, also affecting the growth of forage and small grains. Got one report that Vidalia onions, which are big in Georgia here, have slowed down because they've had problems with cloudy conditions and moisture. They have really been coming along well this week by comparison. The crops are generally coming along well. Insect and disease pressure hasn't been too bad, but they have to watch it carefully. And the blueberries are blooming and they're vulnerable to frost. Have not checked to see if the peaches are blooming, but usually they're not far behind the blueberries. So they had plenty of chill hours this year, as we talked about in earlier months. So they're all ready to go. And then as we approach the end of winter dormancy, water needs go up by the plants. And so we'll have to watch for dry conditions and flash drought. And I think that's all I've got.
Great. Thank you so much to our presenters, Pam Knox and Jeff Dober and Sandra Rain, as always, for an excellent overview of past, current, and present and future conditions for climate in the region. My name is Meredith Muth. I work with the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS. I'm one of the organizers of this webinar series, along with the National Weather Service of NOAA and the Southeast Regional Climate Center. Now, if you have any questions or comments on anything you heard today or related to climate in general, climate phenomena or climate impacts in the region, feel free to enter that into the question box. We have a couple on queue right now, and we'll answer those just shortly. We also have a couple of folks on hand to answer questions in addition to our excellent panelists. Just a reminder that we will be sending out a brief email that summarizes the key points, the key takeaways, along with a few of our figures and web links, and a link to the recording. That'll go in an email to all of those who registered. In addition, we are now also posting these webinar summaries online on drought.gov, the U.S. drought portal. You can always find it on the homepage under drought updates. For those of you who joined us last month, we gave a quick overview of this new portal, drought.gov. If you haven't seen it, please do take a few minutes to check it out. And you can even look at drought conditions all the way down to your zip code and city level. This webinar summary will also include a registration link for upcoming webinars. Our next one will include a special presentation on tornado climatology and forecasting in the Southeast. When you leave us today to enjoy the rest of your day, post-webinar survey will pop up. If you'd like, feel free to take it. It's just a few questions. And if there's any specific topics you would like to learn more about, please let us know and we can go find some great presenters. Or if there's something that you think would be useful to this community, we'd be happy to talk about you sharing that with us. And as always, any comments or suggestions, please let us know. So with that, I am going to go ahead and start our questions again. Just enter it into the question box. Our first question is related to Florida. So this could be for Sandra, as well as we have the state climatologist of Florida, David Zierden, on the line, who might be able to answer. It seems Florida is always the exception recently. Temperatures were above normal, while the rest of the region was around average. And last year, while the region was essentially drought-free, there was drought in Florida. Any thoughts as to why this is the case? David, would you like to try to answer that for us?
Yeah, this is David Zierden. Just by looking at past observations, over the past 5 to 10 years, especially the past 5 years, Florida's experienced a fairly abrupt warming trend where 5-year average temperatures over the most recent 5 years are running a full 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than any other time in our period of record. So it's been what I'd almost call an abrupt shift to warmer temperatures, and warmer temperatures alone lead to more situations of drought. I don't know that Florida's experienced any really harsh or widespread droughts since about 2011, 2012. But the rising temperatures are certainly playing a role in that. And the farther you go down the state, especially South Florida, they're seeing this increase in temperature even more than North Florida. So it's all tied to changing climate and the changing of our background climate. Why Florida's experienced more of an abrupt change, it may be tied to sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico and Atlantic Ocean, which are also warming, and it could be tied to just changes in our general circulation patterns. But whatever the cause is, it's certainly not debatable that we've experienced a change in recent years.
Thank you, David. We have a follow-up question for you. Do you have a recent presentation or a website that shows what you just described?
Oh yeah, I can. I have many that I could pull from, and I can make them available through you, Meredith, through NIDIS for broader distribution.
Great. And for the person who asked that question, I do have your name, and we'll follow up directly with you. Thank you. The next question is for Pam, related to the ag losses in Texas. Do you know when we might hear a report of ag losses in Texas from the bitter cold they had?
I've seen a few things already. I've put some of the articles on my blog, but as you know, sometimes it takes time to figure out how bad things are going to be. And so there hasn't been a complete accounting yet. I would imagine that the Texas Department of Agriculture would be the ones to really pull that together. There have been quite tremendous losses in citrus, for example, some losses in livestock because of the cold. It's calving season, and so, you know, those calves, if they calve into the frigid cold temperatures, really have a hard time. And so there's been some losses due to that. Some others, probably vegetables down along the southern part of the state have also been affected. It was amazing because the cold outbreak was so strong it got into Mexico and caused problems in some Mexican agriculture as well. So I think it's going to be a tremendous loss. And someone was circulating on email this morning what the temperature patterns looked like during that outbreak, and it was just unbelievable how cold it was during that 1 week when the cold air came in. And so many people were not prepared for that, as you know, with the electricity, but farmers too were not prepared for it and had a lot of problems with that as well. And so I'm sure the losses will be tremendous. I'm sure it will be $1 billion disaster, but I have not yet seen the full accounting, and I think probably extension agents are working feverishly to try to get that done.
Thank you, Pam. And we've mentioned a couple of times already about a blog that Pam Knox produces. There will be a link to that in the webinar recap. If you're interested, you're welcome to sign up for that. It's on climate and agriculture in the Southeast. And she also speaks about broader climate issues on a regular basis. So thank you for that service, Pam. Sure. I don't see any more questions. Do any of our panelists have, or guest panelists have, any other additional comments regarding what's been happening or what we might look for in the future in addition to what's already been said?
Yeah, this is David Zierden again. I just want to say that Sandra Rain did a great job showing what the typical La Nina impacts are for the Southeast, and basically what went wrong this year, where what we actually experienced in the winter months, December through February, was quite different from the typical La Nina and even the seasonal outlooks from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center. So she did a great job explaining it, and Pam Knox and I attended a meeting of farmers and extension in the tri-state area a couple weeks ago, where we had this same conversation. And while they fully understood the probabilistic nature of seasonal climate prediction and we're even receptive to what went wrong this year, there's still a little bit of a problem with a year like this eroding confidence in these climate predictions and the use of climate information. So that'll be an area where we need to continue to work with the stakeholders, understand the risk, understand the probability of a wrong forecast, and still be able to make use of climate information and climate forecast.
Excellent, David. I'm glad you made that point. Thank you. Okay, we're out of questions. So thank you all for joining us today, and I wish you all a wonderful week. And thank you again to our presenters. Take care, everyone.